Hey guys, welcome back to Honey in the Rock, episode 99. I'm Sophie, and this is Hannah Taylor. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, so Hannah and I go to church. Whoa, I just hit my desk. We go to church together. She has a little girl, and she's married. Um, and are you a high school teacher?
I am, yeah. So I switched to teaching virtually when Rachel Ann had her diagnosis, which we can talk more about later. Um, but yeah, I teach high school social studies.
Yes, so fun. Um, High school. I mean, social studies might have been one of my favorite classes in high school. Wasn't a
That's
big
awesome.
school girl, but I appreciated some history. Well, thank you for coming on. And Hannah's going to tell us a little bit about her story. I had the honor to sort of watch some of the last couple years play out and just watch her and her husband cling on to the Lord so closely through some different trials they've been through. Um, but I haven't heard the beginning of your story, and so I'm excited to also hear it as well. You can start wherever
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, I grew up going to church. I remember my granddaddy would even come pick me up in his pickup truck and go to Sunday school, like before my parents came with my baby sister. So just early memories of going to church and being loved on there. But something clicked during Bible school when I was in fourth grade. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. I need Jesus. And that's when I really decided to start following him. So about fourth grade, I grew up in a Presbyterian church, so I was baptized as a baby. So I joined the church at that point. So it's like, choosing to be baptized in a Baptist church like we go to now.
Right.
But at that point, I just started following the Lord, and I really feel like I grew in my faith more in college, especially.
Yeah.
So I went to Crew, which is like a student organization, kind of like FCA, that really invest in students, helping us learn more about Jesus, but also be a good community as well. So that was really probably one of my favorite parts of going to college.
Yeah.
So we would have like weekly get togethers with everybody where we would hear a message from like one of the leaders or a visiting pastor or something like that. um, Sing songs, worship, but then we would also have a Bible study with a group of girls, our age usually. So that was really cool as well.
Yeah. And I think that also shows like why it's so important to get involved and find community, whether that's your church community or when we go to college or whatever that looks like as an adult small group. Just like dive into a community of fellow believers. We're not called to walk this Christian walk alone. So I really like that. That's a big part of
Absolutely.
your story of taking Jesus seriously and getting in community like that. When did you meet Daniel?
So we
Did you
met
guys
in
meet?
high school.
Oh,
We met in high
sweet.
school and started dating when he was a senior and I was a junior. And
Yeah.
then he went on to Clemson and he wanted to study architecture. So that's the only school in South Carolina that you can do that at. So I was going to be an education major. So I also ended up going to Clemson. Um, and he did crew as well. And he really liked it. He actually played in their band for a while, like for the worship song part of it. So
Yeah, that's so
yeah.
cool. Um, and then you can take us on up a little closer to more now in this little last journey you've walked through, which I think is also really sweet that you grew up in a church because some things that you're about to tell us of like this hardship, I think it's really important that, you did grow up in a church and you have this foundation. Not that people who didn't grow up in a church can't have a foundation, but just prioritizing having a foundation built on Jesus. And then once the time get hard, you already have this foundation of who Jesus is, and when doubt comes and when the questions come and why God, you have already know who Jesus is. And so I enjoyed hearing that part of your story too, to know that you knew the Lord from a young age.
Yeah. Well, let's see, when I graduated college, I went to work in Rock Hill. Daniel went back to Clemson for his master's. So a couple years later, we got married. and he already had a job in Greenville, so I moved to Greenville,
Yeah.
and we decided to visit churches and kind of take turns, like visiting a Presbyterian, visiting a Baptist church.
Yeah.
So we were invited to our church
Mhm.
and both loved it. We just absolutely loved the teaching, but also the community, like how welcoming people are and how much they actually do care about you there. So that's why we ended up staying at Mountain Creek. Um, we had our daughter in March of 2020, which was its own interesting story.
Yes.
um, and her name's Rachel Ann. She's 4 now. So let's see. She went to daycare her first couple years, normal kid, and then summer of 2022, she broke her ankle on the playground, which was scary, but I was like, she's a kid, she's gonna get broken bones. That
Right.
happens. And then she started running fevers. So I kept taking her back to the doctor, like she shouldn't have a fever from a broken bone, like what's going on? And they ended up doing blood work, and we found out she had cancer. And we ended up staying in the hospital overnight that day and found out what type it was, which is leukemia. She got a port placed the next day and started doing chemo pretty immediately. So just even that first part of that, like our first phone calls were to our parents, but then Daniel called Rhett, who was our assistant pastor at the time and our life group leader.
Yeah.
Um, so just having that community as well to support us. Matt came down immediately and stayed with us through that first part, and
Yeah.
kept coming back every day, which was amazing. Um, so just having that support, but also that first night, like I remember just cuddling Rachel Ann in the hospital bed and praying, God, I don't know what else to say, but God.
Mhm.
Um, and that's all you have to say. I mean, you don't have to have the words.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us the Spirit intercedes for us, when we don't have those words, and it's true.
Right. Yeah. I remember praying similar words in a situation I was in. All I could say was Jesus, 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 and knowing like that's all I can say, and just like trusting the Spirit will intercede for us. He knows like our hearts. He knows where we're broken and where we're whole, and that He's gonna take care of us. And so I think that's really powerful. Also, just like when you don't know what to say, call on God, call on Jesus. It's really sweet.
Absolutely. And
And then,
Jesus, go ahead.
sorry, yeah, no, you're good.
The Bible also says Jesus is right there at the right hand of God, also praying for us too, which is really comforting as
Yeah.
well.
I know, that's so sweet. Um, yeah, and I just remember, being at church and as we were praying for Rachel Ann, it was almost this more I think it woke some people up and it probably woke you guys up too, but it's like, no, wake up. Like what are we doing? What are you living for? What are you prioritizing? When, just a sweet little girl is so sick and um what did that kind of look like in your own life as your whole life kind of changed but in one moment um when you got those test results back, and so how did you sort of begin to live differently even though you knew Jesus your whole life, um just like take them more seriously as you had to walk that journey?
I definitely learned a lot about prayer,
Mhm.
um, and praying the word, praying scripture. Like there, let's see if I can find it.
Yeah.
I remember the first or second day, I had this stack of paperwork I was supposed to be filling out, but I just started reading the Psalms and Job first, actually. I was
Yeah.
feeling a lot like Job at that
Yeah.
time. But I just remember praying through some of the Psalms at that point. So one of them was Psalm 22, like verse 14 and 15. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. Um, but then also, let's see, there was one verse I kept coming back to in Job 19:25 and 26. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. So
Mm,
just going back to his word, relying on that,
right.
letting
And
that be a staple part.
yes, that's so good and that's so important. And I like how both of those verses are like go together almost. It's like crying out, lamenting. You're experiencing the deepest pain, watching your baby girl suffer and whatever the listener is, whatever you're going through, big or small, it's like we can cry out to God, we can lament, our heart can be broken. But then you read that verse in Job of, but my Redeemer lives. And we have the hope because our Redeemer lives. And we can walk these journeys in life that are hard, whether it's a diagnosis or a loss of a job or a lost family member, whatever the hardship looks like. Then we get to have this hope, cry out to God and almost complain to Him, but then finishing it up with the but my Redeemer lives, and we can keep going because we have an ultimate purpose, to glorify God, and Jesus came to fulfill these Old Testament promises in the law. And so I think that's really sweet how both of those verses end up going together so well, to not say, hey, you can't complain or you can't admit that this time is hard, but as you're saying this is hard, also knowing and trying our best to believe. It's like, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. Trying our best to believe also that my Redeemer lives and He's going to work it out for good.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so then after those, first couple weeks, after you got in the routine of chemo treatments and all of those things, what did that, how was finding a new routine and still trying to stay grounded, but also understanding this was a hard situation?
Well, it took a while to get to where we felt like we had a routine. So she did her first 8 days of chemo inpatient,
Yeah.
and then we got to go home. But then her port got infected, so we were back in the hospital for almost a month. But then coming out of that, I think we finally started getting somewhat of a routine. At that point, she was having appointments 4 out of 5 days a week, like between going to the cancer clinic to therapies and everything else. Um, so just waking up early to get some work done and then taking her to the appointments that she's not going to have fun at.
Right.
um, and just, trying to
We'll just do
do
it.
what
Yeah.
we have to do. Yeah. We ended up, I think, probably around September, October. Daniel and I were able to go back to church, like taking turns, though. So one of us would stay at home with Rachel Ann. So she was, and still kind of is, immunocompromised. So at that time, like she couldn't go to church, she couldn't go out to a restaurant or whatever. So, but being able to go back to church and be in community with other believers was so helpful. Um, that
And
was just so encouraging.
yeah, and probably see, like you're probably being told or praying, or I don't, probably got some meals or, different ways the Lord was providing like tangibly through the church. But then to be able to be back in with the community to see it happening is also probably, it was probably a little bit encouraging just to like, you can hear stuff like, oh, we're praying for you, oh, or this or that, but to be able to see it, just to be able to like go back and worship God with these people who are praying for you so deeply, it probably had to be a little encouraging. But I remember, I think I saw Daniel back at church first when you guys were switching Sundays, and it was just like brought tears to my eyes immediately, because how easy would have been for you guys to just run from who Jesus is. It's like, well, if you're a good, I'm sure you ask this a lot of times, but if you're a good God, then why did you let this bad thing happen to my baby? Or, we ask those questions in the hard times, but to see you guys, even probably through those questions, you stood firm on the foundation of who Jesus is as our Redeemer. Um, and so I think that was just so encouraging, and to not have walked through something like that, but then to be able to like, but you can come out, you and Daniel together as a couple, but also as a family, holding on to who Jesus is in the midst of the hardest thing imaginable. And so I think that was really encouraging. And then to walk by, I teach the through fifth grade Sunday school class, and so I was walking by the classroom that Rachel Ann was in, and I saw it decorated for her a couple months later, and it was just so sweet. Um, for her just to, get to the point to be back, to be with our little friends and, live what can be most normal for, 3-year-old, 4-year-old at that time. So
Absolutely. That
that
was
was
the
so,
best.
yes. And then this year, sweet, she was in our or in our VBS like rec time, and so we would go and pick her up, and it was just so fun to get to like watch her run around on the playground with her friends, and she would come up to me and want to hold my hand everywhere we went, and it was just to like see the miracle that she is and that she was and will continue to be. Just to see her and get to interact with her just made it even more special to, it's like we're praying so hard for her and we're praying so hard for you and Daniel. And then when you get to, to spend time with her, it's like, oh my goodness, like how special, um, in the Lord's like provision in her life. Um, so that was really sweet.
Absolutely.
I have another, just how did you guys see the Lord still providing in the midst of a hardship, watching your daughter have this cancer diagnosis and 4 out of 5 days a week, being at doctors and just one thing after another. Um, but what did it still look like to see the Lord providing in that time?
Well, we still see that. It's been really amazing. Just like you were talking about earlier, all the meals that were brought. The kids collected change for vending machines for us. That was so sweet. They would send cards to Rachel Ann that they had made. People came to visit before visitors were restricted.
Right.
Um, that was just so encouraging. Just text, phone calls from friends, FaceTiming people just to say hey so Rachel Ann can keep up with her friends. That was super sweet. But
Wow.
also through like the doctors and nurses we interacted with, like Rachel Ann's doctor is a believer, and before we had the conversation about what specific type of cancer she had, and like
Mhm.
when he officially told us that it was leukemia, he
Wow.
prayed for us and he said
Right.
he had been praying for us. And he actually lives near our church, and every time he drives by, he prays for Rachel Ann.
Oh,
So just knowing that, we felt even more looked after.
right. That's so sweet. And honestly, like for the listener, maybe you're watching somebody else walk a journey like this. Just like take some of those things she just said that ended up being encouraging. It doesn't fix the situation, but that just might bring a little encouragement. Small things that we can do. I encourage you to do that, those tangible things that we can do as the hands and feet of who Jesus is. Um, and that the power of prayer and just doctors praying, but also I'm sure in return, um, the doctors and the nurses that watched after Rachel Ann probably saw that in you guys also, you know, saw Jesus through you guys as you were stood firm together, um, and just like kept praying over her and being with her. And I just like can't imagine being one of those nurses watching a family like that just stand so firm on who Jesus is. And so I also know in return that was probably encouraging for them to see y'all's family in that way. Um, okay, and then now is what does her like diagnosis look like now?
So she is in remission. She's been
Okay.
in remission since August 2022.
Mm,
So she's almost 2 years cancer free.
okay.
So she'll finish chemo at the end of November, and then she'll have still checkups with the cancer clinic for the rest of her life, but pretty normal after November. So
Right. That's so exciting. And just to have that like expect of like, okay, here we are. We can keep going. Just if one
Mhm.
foot in front of the other, just keep going. The doors are opening. That's so special. And then now that, she gets to do little normal things that she wants to do and plan a playground and have fun like that. So that's really sweet. Um, and then for you guys, just like get back into a little bit of a routine of some normalcy is probably so sweet. And then probably, I think something that we all can learn, whether we've gone through it or just watching you or listening to you or seeing other people that we know, but just like being encouraged to now live differently in spite of what you've gone through. It's like you'll never live the same. But also you'll probably to hold on to Jesus tighter and to build on that foundation, because when the next storm comes, we're going to have even bigger foundation to live off of. And so I think that's encouraging. Sometimes a hard thing has to almost wake us up to take Jesus seriously. And sometimes even just watching other people go through a hard time, encourages us to take it a little more seriously. So, uh,
Absolutely.
well, this has been so sweet, and encouraging to hear you talk about this, and for me personally to watch you guys walk through it. And now that she's in remission, and praise Jesus, and just how y'all's family has just like gone through it with such grace, even in the hard times, as you held on to prayer and stuff. So thank you for being a light in that way, and being willing to share your story on here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, I bet you got to go get back to your girl now. So, um, for coming on, and thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.